Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through today's topic. We're diving into a region of the world that holds just massive potential, yet it remains one of the most fascinating geopolitical puzzles of our entire era. We are talking about South Asia. It's a place defined by the towering Himalayas, the vast Indian Ocean, incredibly ancient civilizations, and some truly dynamic modern growth. But right beneath that shared geography, there's a story of immense ambition tangled up in some really deep complexities. All right, let's just take a second to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this region. We are talking about roughly 25% of the entire global population. That is nearly 2 billion people living in South Asia alone. This area contains some of the fastest growing economies on the planet, an enormous labor force, a rapidly expanding middle class, and multiple nuclear-armed powers. The human and economic capital concentrated right here is genuinely awe-inspiring. By all logic, this region should be an absolute economic juggernaut.
But here is the striking paradox, and really the massive what-if hanging over this whole region. Despite that massive population and being right next door to each other, trade between neighboring countries in South Asia is actually among the lowest of any major region in the world. Seriously, they are immediate neighbors, yet they barely trade with one another. It's a glaring, almost unbelievable contrast between limitless potential and abysmally low economic integration.
Which naturally brings us to the core question. Why has this vision remained largely unrealized? Think about the rest of the world for a second. Europe emerged from the ashes of World War II and managed to create the highly integrated European Union. Southeast Asia built ASEAN, which totally transformed their economic landscape. But South Asia's equivalent regional organization has really struggled to get off the ground. Today, we're going to unpack exactly why that happened by taking a close look at that specific organization, SAARC. Here is our roadmap for the explainer today. First, we'll look at the South Asian dream. Second, how SAARC supposedly works on paper. Third, why that system broke down in reality. Fourth, we'll check out the ASEAN and BIMSTEC alternatives. And finally, we'll wrap up with the future of South Asia. Let's start with Section 1, the South Asian Dream and the shared foundations of the region.
Back in the late 1970s, leaders in this region recognize a pretty profound truth. These nations share massive labor forces and rapidly growing economies, sure, but they also share very similar developmental challenges, things like poverty reduction and massive infrastructure needs. And beyond just economics, there is a shared civilizational space here, with incredibly deep cultural, linguistic, and historical connections. So the realization was actually pretty simple. If these nations could just cooperate on their shared traits, they could dramatically accelerate growth and lift millions out of poverty together, rather than everyone trying to do it totally alone.
Moving on to Section 2, how SAARC actually works, or at least how it approaches regional cooperation. SAARC. That stands for the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. It was officially established in Dhaka back in 1985. The goal was incredibly ambitious, but deeply, deeply necessary. To promote regional cooperation, accelerate economic development, facilitate trade, and perhaps most importantly, build trust among the member states. To manage the whole shebang, they set up a permanent secretariat headquartered in Kathmandu, Nepal. That office was designed to coordinate these massive regional goals across a bunch of technical committees, covering everything from agriculture all the way to education. And this idea is brilliantly illustrated by a real-world analogy. Just imagine, 8 neighboring families living on the exact same street. Step 1, every family maintains their own completely independent household. Nobody is giving up their personal sovereignty, right? Step 2, they decide to cooperate on shared neighborhood needs. Pitching in to fix the local roads, trading goods, or helping each other out during a bad storm. Step 3 is the result. Everyone's daily life improves together. International diplomacy, at its core, often mirrors that exact kind of local neighborhood cooperation. Those 8 neighboring families in our analogy, those are the 8 member nations of SAARC. The founding members were India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, and the Maldives, with Afghanistan joining a bit later in 2007 as the 8th member. Now, a super important dynamic to understand here is that India plays a uniquely dominant role simply by virtue of its massive size. It accounts for the vast majority of the region's total GDP and population. Which brings us to Section 3, why the system broke down and the reality of geopolitics. If you track the timeline, you can see that the early momentum eventually crashes into a pretty solid brick wall of stagnation. In 1985, you have this hopeful establishment. By 1993, they're actually making real progress. They formed SAPTA, which was a regional trade agreement designed to lower tariffs, and that later evolved into a free trade area. But then the timeline gets really rocky. Fast forward, and 2014 marks the very last time a successful leaders' summit was actually held. By 2016, a planned summit was postponed entirely, and since then, the highest level activity of the organization has essentially stalled out.
So what happened? Well, the fatal mechanical flaw within SAARC's design is its absolute reliance on consensus-based decision-making. That means for any major initiative to move forward, every single member must agree, unanimously. If even one country raises an objection, it blocks all progress for everyone else. Now, when everyone is getting along, it's highly democratic. But when they aren't, it's a recipe for complete and total paralysis. And that brings us directly to the structural roadblocks. That requirement for unanimous consensus breaks down entirely when your dominant members have severe unresolved disputes. The deep-seated political tensions and security concerns between India and Pakistan frequently spill right over into the SAARC platform. Because of that consensus rule, when those two nations are at odds, the entire organization literally freezes. As a result, implementation of key projects takes years, if it happens at all, and barriers to intra-regional trade remain stubbornly high. Let's pivot to Section 4, the alternatives out there, specifically looking at ASEAN and BIMSTEC.
When we compare the data between these groups, the differences are super revealing. Take SAARC in South Asia, with its 8 members. It includes both India and Pakistan, and its activity level right now is very low. Now compare that to ASEAN in Southeast Asia. 10 members, extremely high integration, robust activity. Finally, look at BIMSTEC, which is centered around the Bay of Bengal. It has 7 members, it includes India, but crucially not Pakistan, and its activity level is strategically growing.
Let's contrast ASEAN and SAARC directly for a second. Why did Southeast Asia succeed where South Asia struggled so much? Well, ASEAN focused relentlessly on economic integration first. They built trade interdependency and intentionally kept major power rivalries entirely out of their economic roadmap. SAARC, unfortunately, found itself dominated by political disputes right out of the gate. The rigid consensus challenges meant that politics constantly derailed the economics, rather than letting the economics smooth over the politics. Because of all these struggles, we're currently witnessing a really fascinating modern geopolitical pivot. On one side, we have SAARC, which aims to cover all of South Asia but remains largely inactive due to those political roadblocks we just talked about. On the other side, we have BIMSTEC. Countries like India are increasingly turning their energy and resources toward BIMSTEC. Because it focuses on the Bay of Bengal and doesn't include Pakistan, it effectively bypasses the structural hurdles of SAARC. This allows these nations to finally push forward on things like connectivity, energy corridors, and real trade. Finally, Section 5, the future outlook and the real-world impact on everyday citizens. So the absolutely crucial point we need to take away from all this macroeconomics is this. The stakes for regional integration are incredibly real and highly personal. If the borders between these nations were functionally bridged for trade, everyday citizens stand to gain immensely. We are talking about millions of new jobs generated by a much larger, unified market. We are talking about lower prices on everyday goods because logistics costs and tariffs drop significantly. It means better connectivity, think train lines and energy grids spanning across borders, and highly coordinated responses to public health crises and natural disasters. Ultimately, this is about unlocking the true human potential of an expanding, vibrant middle class. Which leaves us with one final, truly monumental question to ponder. SAARC was an incredibly ambitious dream, and while the organization itself might be stalled right now, the need for what it represents has literally never been greater. Can this massive, dynamic region find a way, whether through SAARC, BIMSTEC, or totally new avenues altogether, to overcome its entrenched political realities? Because the answer to that question won't just define the future of South Asia, it will unlock a completely new future for nearly 2 billion people, reshaping the entire global economy in the process. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this really helped map out both the complexities and the absolutely incredible promise of this region